Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for being here with me. In today's lesson, I want to check out some of George Harrison's finest guitar work from a real early Beatles tune, their cover of Till There Was You. Considering that George was just 20 years old at the time of recording this, it's amazing how mature and tasteful his guitar playing is. And you can really hear his key influences shining through, from Chet Atkins to Django Reinhardt, and even a touch of Mickey Baker in there. This is going to be a really thorough look at exactly what George plays and how he approaches playing this tune. Not only are we going to learn his iconic intro and solo, but we're going to learn exactly what he's playing behind the vocals as an accompanist as well. So of course we'll be covering the chord progression itself as we make our way through this piece. And maybe we'll even take a moment to look at some of the interesting voicings that John opts for as the rhythm player. Now there are a lot of versions of the Beatles playing this out there, from the album version itself on the With the Beatles record, where George is playing a nylon string classical guitar, to the various live versions. And this is going to be kind of a pick and mix of all of those things. You know, my favourite aspects of each of these performances all thrown into one study. So buckle up and join me for the next 20 minutes or so while we sit back and admire just what a great guitar player George was. So I very much think of this song as a jazz standard, and it shares all of the same common hallmarks in terms of the progression, things that you're likely to see in many jazz standards. This one's in the key of F, which again is a very common key in jazz. So let's make our start with the intro. Let's look at the changes and then look at what George plays over them. So here are the voicings that John goes for. He plays an F major chord in second inversion, so we can call this F over C, because C is now your lowest note. Then we have an F sharp diminished 7 with the root on top. Then a G minor, again like the F, this is a second inversion. It has the fifth in the bass as opposed to the root. G minor over D, we can call this. C9. So that's taking the place of a regular C7 or even a C major. Because it's the fifth chord of the key, we can make it a dominant seventh. When it's dominant seventh, we can extend it, put a 9 in there. So here's how that sounds. Same again. So 2 beats on each chord. A little brief bit of harmonic analysis here. Because this sequence is going to crop up multiple times, it's kind of good to get to know it, isn't it? So we have an F major, that's the 1 because we're in the key of F. F sharp diminished 7. You could call this a flat 2 diminished if you like, but I'm thinking of this as a sub for a 6th dominant, so D7. So in my mind this all would begin life as something like this maybe. F, D7, G minor, C7. We're subbing in this F sharp diminished in place of the D7. And check it out, when you look at this particular voicing for the F sharp diminished, look how much we have in common with a D7. Take the lowest note away, or drop it a semitone, and you've got a D7 chord. So it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to think there's a relationship there. You could call this D7 flat 9 if you like, this being the flat 9. Anyway, we could go down a rabbit hole talking about all that stuff. Another way of looking at it, a very efficient way, is the Barry Harris way, where he often spoke about there being 2 diminished chords. One is semitone below the 2 chord, and one is semitone above the 2 chord. And we could think of this as the semitone below the 2, because it's the F sharp diminished, and it's leading us to the 2, the G minor. Anyway, so to carry on, that G minor is the 2 chord, C9 is the 5. Okay, so what does George play over that? Well, he knows his triads very clearly. Starts off with a couple of notes from an F major triad. I think it's really useful to look at this entire root position shape here on string set 2. He doesn't play the bass note, because by the time he's getting around to hitting that, the chord is now changed to the F sharp diminished, so he has to think fast and change with the chord, of course. So now you're going from an F to an F sharp diminished, which all that requires is that you lift the root a semitone. Then a G minor, again just staying on that string set and following the changes in its triad form. F sharp diminished, G minor, and then over the C, he's just running up the notes of a C major scale, or I guess technically we should think of this as C mixolydian, because it's belonging to the key of F. F major scale, C mixolydian, the same thing. So here's how he uses those shapes to make a nice little melody. Check out the timing, it doesn't come in on the first beat. There's a very strong leaning to the quarter note triplet feel throughout this piece. Check it out. 100 BPM, slower than the full speed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So just a quick side note about quarter note triplets. To unravel their mystery, it would take an entire video, and maybe I'll do that at some point, but as a quick sort of reference point, I'd recommend practicing doing this kind of thing. Let's take just a scale, like an F major scale. You can feel how they kind of feel like they're a little bit behind the beat. There's a sort of lazy lack of urgency to the quarter note triplet thing. It's kind of an interesting rhythm. Now when people talk about triplets, the default assumption is that they're talking about eighth note triplets, which would sound like this: 1 and a, 2 and a, 3 and a, 4 and a, 1 and a, 2 and a, 3 and a, 4 and a. Now with quarter note triplets, you can think of it as just being half tempo or half time. So instead of thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, you're thinking of half that speed: 1, 2, 1, 2, and you could almost imagine there's only 2 beats in the bar now. Now break those down into triplets: 1 and a, 2 and a, 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 and so on. And that's the feel of quarter note triplets. And what George is doing in this intro is the first note of his quarter note triplet is actually a rest. So you kind of imagine you're striking, but not actually making contact with the note. That can help. Okay, so I guess we just spent a fair chunk of time talking about the intro, but like I say, this sets up ideas that are going to be reoccurring throughout. So now we've got all of that out of the way, it's going to be plain sailing. Again, I've gone all in on the lesson materials for this one. You'll get the tab and notation in Guitar Pro and PDF formats for not only the lead part, but also all the chord voicings, with chord grids and finger numbers no less. You'll also get my backing track, where I played all the instruments myself: drums, bass, guitars, and you'll also get the separate audio file of the performance itself. So yeah, a real bumper pack, and you can get hold of all of that at the links in the description. Okay, now let's get into the verse. We use all of those same chords again, but we add a few extras and we change the quantities. So the F chord now, we have a whole bar. We're going to go F sharp diminished also for a whole bar. And John does one of these lovely rumba kind of patterns. So the same first 3 chords from the intro, right? F, F sharp diminished 7, G minor. Now we go to the 4 minor though. We drag this shape 3 frets higher, B flat minor. Check out my plagal cadence video if you want to know more about the 4 minor. Then we go back to the 1, just for half a bar, and then we go to the 3, wall kick chromatically down to the 2, and then the 5, and then the 1, and as the turnaround we do the 2-5 again, 2-5. So again, that's something I've done a video on recently, the 2-5 survival guide. Check that out, another very common jazz progression. So here's the verse. Now, just before we look at what George plays over that, I just want to make you aware of one thing. I've arranged this as a kind of an abridged version. So rather than playing through all of the verses and all of the bridges and then getting to the solo, we're just kind of focusing on the guitar-centric aspects of it. So we're just doing one verse and then straight into the solo, which is played over another verse, essentially. But in the song, this verse would go around twice, and the second ending would just be slightly different. Instead of having the turnaround, 2-5, you'd have the F, the walk down, as before, and then F to F9, leading you to the bridge. Anyway, with that said, let's look at what George plays over that first verse. Again, back to triads and that quarter note triplet feel. He plays F major, F sharp diminished, G minor, B flat minor. Very efficient, right? It's all just on the same string set. He's just finding the nearest version of the triad to match the chord underneath. And then he does something very cool here. Over the part that goes from the F to the A minor with that chromatic walk down, he's visualizing the triads on the next string set. So F, A minor, A flat minor, G minor. String set 3, these are all what you'd call second inversion triads because they all have the 5th in the bass. And he just plays this on the F, just one note. Slides it to the bottom 2 notes of that A minor, walks down chromatically, goes to the G minor, and then for the C7 or the C9, he goes to the bottom string set and plays one of my favourite triads, that really heavy second inversion C major. The 5th, the root, and the 3rd. And then you go back to the F chord, where he just plays that triad again. And then we're going to go just before setting up the solo. Now, like I say, the solo we're playing a little bit earlier here than it would be in the song. There'd be another verse and bridge to go beforehand. But let's just get straight into the good stuff. Now, this solo is iconic. I mean, again, think of how young he was at the time, right? 20 years old. And remember that these guys didn't have the internet back then, or anything like that. So they were learning by mimicking their favourite records and bringing in all those flavours in a very organic way. It's a really beautiful thing. So he plays this little 2-note pickup line on beats 3 and 4 of the previous bar to the solo. And then as the solo kicks in, he plays an F major scale run. He's using this C-shaped F major scale shape. And again, here the changes he's playing over are the same as in the verse. So that's the F chord done. Next chord is the F sharp diminished, and he plays an F sharp diminished 7th arpeggio. Now you've got the F sharp here, the flat 3, the flat 5, and the double flat 7. Very nice little shape under the fingers. If you've got an interest in Django, you'll want to get to know that one very closely. And then he plays, again, still thinking of the F sharp diminished, leading down to the G minor, but he never plays that bass note, it's just kind of implied. He goes straight to this G minor triad on the top string set. It's a bit of a leap. And then he does this great little idea. So we're taking this chord, keeping it in place, and then adding frets 5 on the G and top E string with the 3rd and 4th fingers. On and off. Then follow the changes to the 4 minor, up 3 frets, B flat minor. You can see very clearly the triad is just being moved along there. The top 3 notes of your bar chords, in fact. Then it goes back to the F, and he plays this. An F6 chord, in a very sort of staccato way, with a rake through the strings. So the F6 is simply an F major, with the additional barring on the top string to bring in the 6th interval. And then he plays this. Again, following the changes, right? That's your A minor, A flat minor, G minor, but on the top string set. Great voicings. And he does that rhythm. And there's something very clever here that I'm sure he must have picked up from the Mickey Baker book, Volume 1. It's one of the things I took from it straight away as well when I read it. Mickey Baker talks about tritone substitution very early on in that book, with the scenario being that we can be thinking C7, or C9 in this case to be specific, but let's say C7, and we can play a dominant chord a tritone away from it. Check out my tritone substitutions video if you want to know more about that stuff. But essentially, we're taking a C7 and dropping the bass note a tritone, 3 whole tones, down to F sharp. And the voicing we play is the Hendrix chord, F sharp 7 with a sharp 9. You're probably more used to seeing it on the A string. It sounds really good down here. A favourite of Django as well, that. You've got the F sharp, then you've got the 5th, so a little power chord shape. Now it's crucial that you block the D string, then your major 3rd, and then the pinky has to bar the top 2 strings to bring in the flat 7 and the sharp 9. So pretty fancy, and in fact John mirrors that in the chord part. He doesn't play the C9 at that point, he plays a G flat major before resolving it down to the F. So here's how that lead part sounds. And then back to an F major triad, this time on the top string set. Also, Chet Atkins, little dip of the whammy bar there. You hear him do that on one of the live versions where he's playing his Gretsch country gent. Now we're thinking about going to the bridge, which we haven't talked about yet, but the bridge starts on the 4 chord, a B flat major. So we think of F7 at this point. John plays an F9, which as we said is an F7 with an extra extension in. That's the 5 of the B flat, so it sets it up beautifully, a little 5-1 moment. Perfect cadence, as they call it. George plays this very elegant run. This is all F7 stuff, with a hint of flat 9 in there, bringing in that diminished arpeggio again. You've got the 3rd, the 5th, the flat 7, the flat 9, then the 3rd, the 5th, and the root, and then hammering onto the major 3rd of the B flat as that chord lands. Okay, so let's talk about the chord progression for the bridge. Here's what John plays. B flat major, again with no root in the bass. B flat minor, so that's the 4 going to the 4 minor, then down to the F. And then a D9. And then this little G minor from earlier on. And then G7. And then C9. And then C augmented. So here's how all of that sounds in real time at the full speed of 116 BPM with the metronome. Do take note of the cool little rhythm variations that John throws in, Latin-infused little bits of fun here and there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Back to another verse. Pretty cool. Okay, and here's George's counterpart to that. This is what we did leading into the bridge. There's beat 1 of the B flat major. Now on the B flat minor, B flat minor 7, root position. Nice simple bar chord. And then we go down to an F major bar chord and we do what I call a Spanish rake. Stupid name for it really. Root note, hit the next few notes on a single downstroke, save the top string of the chord for the final upstroke. Kind of like House of the Rising Sun. And then after the Spanish rake on the F chord, he does this chromatic run from C to C sharp to D, then forms the D9 and does the Spanish rake on that chord. Remember the rules, hit the root, hit whatever are the next few strings but not the top string, saving the top string for the final upstroke. And then the D string, where your major 3rd is, and then hit strings G and B together. And then on the G minor, he employs this very famous thing from the world of jazz called the line cliche, which we've used in a lot of tunes. Check out In a Sentimental Mood and My Funny Valentine if you want really good examples of this. Oh, and Russian Lullaby as well. I've got lessons on all of those. Take a G minor and then walk down chromatically from the root. Usually you're going to find that it takes you all the way down to the 6th. Root, 7, flat 7, 6. Stairway to Heaven style, right? Only this time he sort of takes it halfway there. G minor major 7, and then on the next one he forms a G7 chord. This is just the top 4 strings of your full G7 bar chord, Beatles style. And when I say Beatles style, I'm referring to the fact that the flat 7 is doubled rather than this without the pinky on. So that shape there, you've got the flat 7, the 3rd, the flat 7 again, and then the root. Bit more of that Spanish reiki stuff. And then on the C7 he does this. So you've got 2 forms of C dominant chord, C7, C9, and we're throwing in one of those little Chet Atkins style dips of the whammy bar. And then C augmented, and then invert that chord by moving it up a major 3rd or 4 frets. It's interesting to try and spot where the root is there, by the way. C augmented, where's the C? There it is, G string, 5th fret. Move it up, where's the C now? Top string, and the bottom string in fact. Interesting little thing. If you went down again, just to be thorough, you'd have this. Where's the root now? It's on the B string. Where's Wally? Root note style. Okay, now on to the final verse with the same chord progression as the first verse. So just as a quick recap, F, F sharp diminished, G minor, B flat minor, F, A minor, walk down to the 2, 5, 1. This time though we're sitting on that F chord for 2 bars. Now George plays a lot of the same stuff as before, but he throws in a couple of extra little things. So he does, was his first little phrase. So instead of just playing an F major triad, he's thinking of F major scale stuff. Getting things involved like the 7th, implying F major 7, and then implying the 6th. And then for the F sharp diminished, same as before, G minor, same as before, B flat minor, same as before, F to A minor, again same as before, walking down to G minor, and then that low C triad, and then I'm just doing this at the end here, raking through an F major chord on the top 4 strings before playing what he plays on one of the live versions I found, this really cool kind of Django-y thing. Using enclosures, which I've spoken about at length in some of my lead playing videos, especially the Rebo style ones, or the Gypsy style ones. You've got an F major triad, or a chunk of an F major chord in fact, and you can just visualize the semitone below any of these notes. Very easy way to sound gypsy. And again, the exact phrase he plays. And then this chord progression that they use in the outro is a real stunner. Here's what John plays. C, E, C, to F, D flat, back to the F, and then leave a stop there. Just to point out, the D flat voicing is a typical John favourite, the C shape. Very nice voicing, one of my favourites too. That's a really cool thing, I love that. The 1 to the sharp 5, or maybe we should call it the flat 6, I don't know. 1 to the sharp 5 and back. I think that's such a cool sound. I might start trying to use that more in my day-to-day life. And here's the beautiful and stunning thing that George plays over that. He starts off by simply mirroring John, C, E, C, and then for the F he goes up here to this F6 chord from earlier, but start off by reaching that pinky all the way out to the root, and then take it on and off to get to that 6th and back, and play it with that rake and that sort of playful staccato rhythm. D flat comes along, he plays D flat 7, similar kind of thing, same rhythm, putting that pinky on the 11th fret to add the 9, before taking it away to the root a couple of times, and then back to F6, and then finish when the rest of the band have stopped on an F major 7 voicing. So here's the ending from George's perspective. Now, if I really wanted to go overboard on this, I would also do a lesson on Paul's bass line, which I had to figure out by ear in order to record my backing track for it. And again, there's some great choices in there. Maybe at some point I'll come back and do a lesson on that. And also Ringo's drum part, incredible stuff, very Latin flavoured. On the record he plays bongos, but on the live versions he's using a lot of sort of cross stick technique on the snare. Very cool. And these guys had such a feel. They were so in the pocket and so tight as a band. It's very hard to emulate that. There's a lot of magic in there that people don't quite understand a lot of the time. Listen to it in depth and you'll really start to hear it. Or better yet, try and recreate it yourself and you'll see that something always feels like it's lacking. Dare I say mojo. Bit of fairy dust. Okay, so let's finish off with a bit of tone talk. I'll give you one guess as to what kind of amp I used for this. If you said Vox, you'd be right. I went with a Vox AC15, the hand-wired version in this case. A seriously good sounding amp. Lots of clarity, it's got that typical jangle and chime for days. Very nice. And I used the normal channel as opposed to the top boost channel. I had the volume set to just under halfway, and on the master side of things I had the volume also set to about halfway, and I had the tone cut just past halfway, just to take some of that brittle top end away. The speaker in there is one of my favourite speakers, a Celestion Alnico Blue. It's got a really nice present mid-range to it. And the guitar I'm using is one of my favourite guitars in the world, the Novo Myris J. And all the way throughout I was on the middle position, so the neck and the bridge P90 pickups together. Really nice sort of hollow, slightly glassy tone. Volume and tone were both rolled all the way up. And of course there was liberal use of the Mastery trem. This is my favourite trem on the planet. It's very light, very reactive, very floaty. Oh, and for the reverb, I was using my Strymon Flint pedal set to the 60s spring setting. I had the decay and colour at about 1 o'clock and the mix at 10 o'clock. And there we have it, just one of the many examples of George's brilliant guitar playing. Do leave a comment and let me know if you'd be interested in more deep dives into Beatles tunes, or if you have any ideas in particular. As a huge Beatles fanatic, I'm always up for that. Oh, and please do make sure to like and subscribe and share this video with anyone that you think might be interested. It really helps and it means a lot to me. Okay, thanks guys. I'll see you next time for something completely different. Alright, take care.